Season 1 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Carl Haley, Daniel Murphy, and Douglas Dollars, who reminds you to be present, be loving, and that life moves really fast. So the last exposure I had to a piece of your work was when you were doing a segment and telling a story on a recording of the podcast Risk, the podcast where people tell stories they've never told before. And yours involved being in Edinburgh and having a Scotsman tell you he left his wife because of something in your spirit. Tell the audience and me, I guess, a little bit about what it means to have someone, what it feels like to have someone thrust that upon you.
Well, yeah, sort of. I mean, I think that he, things were going in a certain direction in his life either way, and I ended up being a catalyst for something for him. But I felt like, in terms of the story and what it meant to me, it felt like it was just an extension of the performer relationship with an audience, where people, to be a performer and an artist, you need to be able to kind of have a sliding boundary where you can show people really personal parts of yourself, whether it's your actual feelings about something or portraying feelings as a character, but those are real feelings, and not have it be an intimate experience. Although it might feel to an audience like they might feel like they've had an intimate experience with you, but you don't feel like you've had that as a performer. You don't know that audience any better. So it ends up being a really strange, lopsided sort of thing where it can kind of feel lonely as a performer. Like, oh, all of you people, you feel like you know me, but you don't really know me. And it would be nice if people did, but...
It's Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, sitting down at the Bourgeois Pig in Hollywood with Eliza Skinner, who knows much about performing. You may know her from one of many things, from Friday nights at the UCB Theater in Los Angeles, where she performs with Diamond Lion is the name?
That's right.
Excellent. Saturday nights as well at the Little Modern Theater with former guest on this show, D.C. Pearson. She does a stand-up show called Magic Bag. And what else? Well, you might know her from her comedy videos on the internet. You might know her from her one-woman show. Eliza Skinner is Shameless. You might know her from her days in the experimental all-girl cover group Sticker Book. There's a lot of reasons you might know her. And I want to know more about this sort of... Is it one-way intimacy? Can I call that relationship what you just described, one-way intimacy?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's what a lot of... that's what is so attractive about performers, and why people so often feel like, well, I have a close bond with this performer. My sister is a Broadway performer, and so she's very successful and very popular with that crowd, with people who are into musical theater. And I'll meet people, and they'll find out who my sister is, and immediately say, "Oh my God, I love your sister. I love her." And it always strikes me as so strange, because I'm like, I never saw you at Christmas. I haven't seen you at any of her birthdays.
Where have you been?
Yeah, but you love her. And it's just the same thing. It's feeling this intimate relationship with someone who does not have that with you at all.
What is your standard response to "I love your sister"?
It's usually just, great, I'll let her know. I'll tell her. And then they get very excited.
And your standard response to I left my wife because of what I see you as on stage?
Well, I mean, to be fair, it wasn't I left my wife because of this. It was, I see this in you. Oh, also, by the way, I am leaving my wife, too.
Weirder in a way.
Yeah, it's like, oh, they're not really...
By the way.
Yeah. He was quick to point out, it's not because of you. It's just the timing might make it look like it's because of you.
Sure.
And my response was, I did not think of you this way. I really like, if someone is married or taken, then they're off my radar. So I hadn't even considered anything about him, and he seemed like he was a really nice guy, and who knows how I might feel about him, but I just didn't know him, and he felt he knew me in this way. So my response was kind of like, I would like to get to know you better, but also it seems like you're in a situation right now where you have a lot of stuff to deal with before you should get to know anybody.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Where does something like getting on stage and telling a story like that fit in with your career overall? I described a lot of separate activities, and I could have gone on for a lot longer, even just by what you can find on your About page on your website. So, give us a general shape of what you see yourself as performatively doing.
Expression is a big thing to me. Trying to express the stuff that I'm thinking about and dealing with, but also affecting people. And I feel like the best way to affect people's emotions is to share your own with them. And that's the only way. I don't think that you can imagine emotions. You experience them. And so I try to mind my own, whether it's doing that, telling a literal story, or applying a certain situation or story to something else. Like I felt this way about someone. What would a sandwich feel that way about another pickle? Something like that. But try to make it as really real and personal as possible. I think that's what appeals to people.
This sounds like one of those lessons you classically don't learn early on in a performance career, that you need to use your actual emotions and put them on display. Like, that seems like something someone would say, yeah, 20 years in I found I had to do that, or I found I was doing it, but I definitely did not think I would have to do it right away. Does that ring true to you at all?
I think it depends on your method of study. I think some studies do really go towards that remember the feeling, method acting kind of stuff. I feel, though, that people are scared of that. It's very scary to allow yourself to say these things. I mean, and they're not usually the most attractive things about yourself. If I went on stage and was like, so I'm super good at knitting, and people like me all the time, and I've got great hair, then people would be like, fuck you, we hate you.
Have you seen shows that boil down to that?
Yeah. I've seen at least stand-up sets that boil down to that.
Without naming names, of course. How often? How often do you see that kind of thing? Is that a common, lower tier thrust of a performance, or what is the story there?
Yeah, I mean, it's not terribly often, but it is definitely a lower tier, starting out sort of thing, because people will either go too far in one direction or the other. They'll either be too self-deprecating, where you just feel sad for them, or they'll be they'll kind of talk themselves up, and you just kind of think they're gross. So yeah, you're not showing the most attractive parts of yourself, but again, you don't want to be so self-deprecating that it doesn't ring true either. You kind of have to try to mine that constantly shifting point of accurate truth, which is very hard to do about yourself.
You almost can't see it unless someone tells you.
Exactly. It's like trying to describe what your own face looks like. Like you get glimpses of it, you see it, but it's not something you stare at all the time. It's something everybody else sees a lot more.
Now, we live in an age where the term humble brag is so common, getting so common to describe something we all realized we'd been hearing for decades, this sort of self-deprecating but secret, not so secret self-promoting. And it sounds like, tell me if that's a third thing you have to navigate around. You mentioned the two dangers, and there's one right in the middle you have to now not be as well. Something else you have to be aware of not doing on stage, right?
Yes. Well, there's a time and a place for it. You don't want to do that as part of your act, but then you also can't not do it entirely. We have to be self-promoters. As everybody becomes their own product and their own show, you have to also promote that product and that show, and that becomes difficult if you're too scared of touting what you're doing. You kind of have to be able to do it, but again, not in a gross way. Can't push it too far in either direction. But I definitely feel like there are times where I'm too far into the creation area and rhythm, and have forgotten to tell people about anything I'm doing or promote those things I'm doing. And that's I think just as bad as if I wasn't doing anything but was telling people about it all the time.
Yeah, when did you realize that you were sort of operating under brand Eliza Skinner, and you would have to develop that brand? That makes me feel a little icky to say that, but it's a frame of mind.
Yeah, well, I think there are different points on that step. I remember one of the first ones was I used to be in a musical improv duo. There was three of us, but it was mostly the two of us. And my partner and I took a bunch of photos, and they were real cutesy, because that's kind of how we felt about each other and ourselves. And I looked at them and realized this is a brand that we're creating, and we're telling people with these photos not to take us seriously. We're telling them we're no big deal, old sneakers and silly shirts, and made a conscious decision that, well, we need to start creating the look that we want people to think that we have, and creating the image that we want people to think that we have, that we can't just wait for someone to stick it on us. We can't just wait for someone else to say, oh, that's what you guys are. We're constantly putting something out there. And I think a lot of performers don't realize, especially younger performers, don't realize that everything they're doing is a choice. Everything they wear on stage, photos, all of that, you're creating an image. And if you don't make active choices, it gets real messy. So that was definitely sort of an aha moment of, oh, we need to brand ourselves in a way that we like. And then that was the main focus for me artistically, that group. And then once that broke up and we started focusing on our own personal projects, then I realized, okay, I need to have Eliza Skinner be a big thing, because I am also tied to, as you're saying, a lot of other projects. I'm seen as a member of a lot of other groups, and so to be my own thing, I had to push it up pretty hard. It was a big part of my move from New York to LA. In New York, I was seen again as a member of a lot of groups, and when I came out to LA, the city was sort of like, "Who are you?" And I got to say, "Oh, okay, I'm this. I'm a stand-up. I'm a musical comedian. I am an actor. I'm a writer. Here are examples of all of those works with my name attached to them instead of with my name as a credit on a larger show title."
People will reference you as a musical improviser. How comfortable are you sailing under that banner?
I'm comfortable with it, but it does feel ghettoizing sometimes.
Did you get that label here or New York?
Oh, definitely in New York. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I love doing. It's something that I'm always going to do. I cannot survive without doing musical improv.
A sentence is rarely spoken, by the way. And those two skills it's a rare confluence. I mean, I guess anybody's career survives on finding what skills that they are the rare confluence of. But how did that develop for you? How did you come into possession of those two?
It is very weird. It's sort of like being really good at blowing bubbles or very specialized balloon animals, and people.
But there, the commercial possibilities are obvious.
Well, exactly. That's the thing. People are like, "Wow, well, you got to follow this train to what? Musical improv is not going to take me anywhere, except I got to do it." And I came to it by, as I said, my sister is a musical theater performer, and so in our house, and she's older than me, and so I grew up with her already well into that. So there was a lot of albums in our house and show tunes, and I grew up just listening to tons and tons of musical theater, and I loved it. And I listened to it a lot, more than I even saw it. And in listening to it, you're not only hearing what people are doing, but you're imagining it, which makes you a director in your head. You're directing the action of, oh, then this person walks on stage, and then there's this kind of set and this kind of.
What are the original cast recordings that really occupied your life as a kid?
Well, probably the finest ones. It's pretty embarrassing. My number one show was Starlight Express. Yeah, about the trains on roller skates. Really into that. Really into Evita, Jesus Christ Superstar. So a big Andrew Lloyd Webber foundation, which probably attributes for any kind of outsized ego that I have, since all of his work is about that. So those three. Then I got really into the Mystery of Edwin Drood. Mm-hmm. I think those were the ones that I would just obsessively listen to over and over. And then different shows I would get into for a little while. Yeah, all of those I cast versions in my head, starring all my friends, and really into it. Then when I was in college, I got into our improv group, and one of the things that I found, one of my panic moves, was turning whatever we were in into a musical. We didn't have any accompanist or anything, but that was a world that I knew very well, and I knew how to communicate that way, almost clearer and simply more honestly than otherwise.
Most people would see that as a tenfold increase in difficulty to make something into a musical. Like, it will do anything but not that.
I know. Which I think that once you try it, half of those people would probably think otherwise. Half of them would still think the same way. It's a real left brain, right brain thing. I think it really appeals to the right brain, being like, let's lead with feelings and how something sounds, not how that feeling sounds before what are the facts of the situation. So yeah, I kind of put those together then, but I didn't know anybody did it with an accompanist or with other people singing also, or with the whole thing, until I moved to New York and saw some different groups trying that form and realized, oh, that's my thing. That's what I'm going to do. And I ended up joining all of those groups for various amounts of time and working with all of them, and eventually started doing it at the UCB Theater, where I had been just a regular improviser. They didn't really have musical improv there much. Actually, no. My first show that I did there was a musical improv show. Then I was on a Herald team, and I just kept pushing for musical improv classes. So I developed the curriculum. And when you teach, you really have to break something down and understand what you're doing so that you can teach it to other people.
You're teaching to people with a native interest in musical improv, or ones you kind of have to sell on it?
Both. I mean, they sign up for the class, so they have that level of it. But it's surprising. I'll get people in class who say, I don't like musical theater, I am really scared of this. Every assignment or exercise I give them, they'll sit there like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I'm like, what do you want to do? Why did you take this class?
Did you ask them that literally?
That usually shuts them down even more. Okay. So I can't be that blunt about it.
But you get a sense of what did bring them there, if they are so afraid.
A lot of times it is the fear. It's that idea of, I don't like being scared of something. I want to follow the fear. I want to conquer it. But there's also other things around it besides just the nuts and bolts of doing musical improv. There's being more emotional about your improv and your work. There's learning about music and feeling like, well, I'm not good at rhythm or singing, but I am good at improv, so maybe this will be a way for me to get into music. And there's people who are like, this is going to be fun, and then they get in the class and they're like, well, I didn't know I was going to be scared, but now I am. So they're surprised by it.
You never had a moment of being scared of this yourself then? It was so with you from the beginning that you meet people who say that's scary, and you're like, well, that's what I know. Not
in the same way that I've been scared by other things. And I think the feeling of fear that I feel with it, when and if I ever do or did, I don't register as fear, I register as excitement. This feels exciting and unknown, not this is going to murder me. but they're feelings that are right next to each other. And when I have that feeling, that's where I feel like, oh, I'm on the right track here. If I don't have that feeling, then it feels kind of flat.
Do any types of performances actually scare you, legitimately?
Again, nothing makes me feel like, oh, I'm going to stop breathing and die, which I do feel like some people's feeling about performance, which is why they don't perform, those people. But I think the other feeling close to that I have is a lot of anxiety, and I will get very anxious about stand-up, depending on the room, depending on what type of pressure I feel like is involved in it, depending on how prepared I'm feeling for it, especially if I'm doing new stuff, and depending on just how I'm feeling about my material. Like if I've gotten to a point where I feel like this material is boring me, I feel like, oh, the audience is going to know. It's going to bore them too. They're going to be bored by this. And so it's stand-up is so much about psyching yourself into or out of it. And if I walk into a show and think, I'm going to be great, I'm going to destroy as soon as I get on stage, I will. And if I walk into a show saying, this is all hack stuff, I can't believe I even talk about half of these subjects, then it's going to be terrible. And they're going to think that the audience is going to think the same exact thing that I do.
With a strength in musical improvisation, it's got to be tempting to remain in New York City, given the robustness of the theater world there. I mean, compared to Los Angeles does have theater, but they say here it exists, we have it. There, it's like, well, it's the theater center of the world, obviously. So, what have you felt about that? You know, that there has to be that tractor beam from New York when you're a musical improviser, or is there?
Well, again, if musical improv was a career path, then yeah, you'd be right. But it's not. Again, the group that I was in, if anything was going to become a career in musical improv, it would have been that group. We were very successful. We were good at what we did. We had a lot of followers. We had industry attention. But for instance, a lot of people want to have a dream of musical improv on Broadway. It costs millions of dollars to put up a Broadway show. Unless you are sleeping with an eccentric billionaire, no one is ever going to say, here are millions of dollars to do your show where you can't tell me what's going to happen every night.
Have you encountered this, the sort of sugar daddies or metaphorical sugar daddies? Is that what's behind some of these shows?
I have not, but in trying to wrap my head around it, like, what is any possible way that this could happen? The only scenario I can come up with is some old man or lady in a great big hat and scarf being like, I think you're lovely. Here's my sacks of money. Go make your dreams come true and give me a kiss.
With some vividness, you've envisioned this.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I've got the whole scenario.
Now that's a career plan.
Yes, yeah, finding old billionaires. I don't think I'm being negative in saying I don't think that's going to happen. That doesn't mean that it's not still a great art form that really inspires people. And, we perform to sell out houses every Friday here at the UCB. And the same thing happens in New York at the UCB there. There's another Diamond Lion there. And it does very well, and people really enjoy it and they feel good after they leave, but it doesn't pay the rent. And as much as I love musicals, and I do love musicals, I love movies too. I love TV. And I love paying my rent. Yes. So it felt like the only jobs that there are in New York within my artistic skill set would be musical theater. And I was not very successful at that there. I would go on legit auditions, and some people loved me, but I didn't have the training for that kind of stuff. I didn't, I'm not a dancer. I'm not Sutton Foster.
Who is?
Only Sutton Foster is. So I didn't really have... I made stabs at that world, but I didn't really get stuck into it. And I felt like my skills as a comedian were... I had much better payoff for much quicker. The music heightened my comedic skills and set me apart from other comedians, but my comic skills didn't set me apart from other musical performers in the same way.
Now, the classic question, one of the three options here, do you feel as if you came to Los Angeles from New York, as if Los Angeles dragged you from New York, or do you feel as if New York pushed you away to Los Angeles?
I would say I came to Los Angeles from New York. It would almost be that New York pushed me, except that it didn't feel like a push. It felt like a shutting down. I guess they're turning off the lights at this bar. I guess it's time to go.
Last call.
Yeah, it really felt like last call. I made a little deal with myself with all these different stores and restaurants that I liked, that I would pick one and be like, okay, when that one closes, that's when New York is done and I'm gone. And it would close, and then it'd be like, oh, okay, well, that one. How about this other one? When this one closes, then I'm gone. And the final straw for me was when Law and Order moved. If Law and Order couldn't survive in New York, like the most New York show.
Widely regarded as the one acting job in New York, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
As far as TV, yeah. If that can't survive there and that moves to LA, okay, and this city is not offering that many opportunities to people in my shoes.
What was happening? What was the cause of all that?
They changed. I don't know if it was directly this, but in general, they changed the tax codes. They used to have a lot of tax credits for shows and movies shooting in New York, and they got rid of those or changed them around. So it made it more difficult for people to bring their productions there. New York is a really expensive town, and so to film something there is crazy unless somebody is helping you out with it, unless you're getting some sort of benefit financially from it.
When DC Pearson was on the show a few weeks ago, he did mention, I forget if it was on mic or off mic, but he talked about this exodus from New York that his peers in comedy and in acting and writing seem to be undergoing. Is that the same thing you saw?
Yeah, it definitely was. It came in waves. There would be like a wave of people that would come out, but it has felt like those waves are getting bigger and bigger. But it also feels like as soon as you get here, it's easier. It's a little more comfortable to live here. And there's more opportunity, whether or not you're actually booking those opportunities. Just the feeling that they're there, it buoys the spirit a little bit. And
good use of buoy, too.
Well, thank you. I hope it was correct. With all of those people coming out, it also feels not very different. I really don't. When I go back to New York, I kind of can see the difference, but here I don't feel that different. I have my same friends. I just drive to their house instead of taking the subway.
Sure. And I took the subway here, so it's not that different.
Exactly. There you go. Depending on where your friends live, it can be just the same.
Right.
There's only a handful of friends. When I was leaving New York, I had a little going away party, and I made an invite on Facebook and was going through clicking on people to invite them, and I realized that I kept looking at people's little photos on there and being like, oh, I'll invite, oh, nope, they already live in LA. Okay, I'll invite, oh, already in LA. Oh, them, no, everybody's already in LA. So it really made sense. It just felt like it was not a foray into a strange world at all, by any means.
All that said, what were the first steps for Eliza Skinner, musical improviser and more, to build the old brand after the transplantation to Los Angeles?
Stand-up.
That's how you do it here?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, I've been doing stand-up for years in New York, but people didn't really know, or it didn't catch in people's brains. I would try to book shows, and they would say, like, are you going to bring a piano? We don't understand. And I was like, no, I do.
They couldn't deal with sort of what you do, or the stand-up scene is such that they weren't sure how to handle people there.
They just thought of me as a musical improviser and didn't understand why this musical improviser wanted 10 minutes on their stand-up show. And I had to convince people, no, I do stand-up. I'm a stand-up. And
would they just not believe you? They have their arms folded and they're just like, well, are you giving you the stink eye or what?
A little bit, but more, everybody's worried about their own stuff, so they're just not thinking of it. You sort of categorize people and what they do, and I don't feel like anybody was trying to hold me down. It was just very hard. Again, branding. It was very hard to rebrand myself for people, redefine myself. And so when I came out here, again, I got to define myself, and starting the show with DC was a great way to do that. Both of us had done, again, a good amount of stand-up in New York, but I don't think anybody would have called either of us stand-ups. Even though, and we both liked it, I can't say everybody liked, I know we liked each other's work. We had good enough sets that we liked each other's stuff. So doing a show together made a lot of sense. And now I think people do see both of us as stand-ups. And I'm able to book other shows and not have to explain to them that I'm going to do stand-up. And I've also seen, through Twitter, seen as a joke writer, and really the only people now I feel like who see me through this music thing are people that I know from New York. People who have known me for a really long time will still say, oh, are you doing this show? Are you singing? No. I don't do that.
This is a bit like those TV movies where the kid is in middle school and they get their reputation of being the loser, and then their dad gets transferred to a new town, and in that new town school they change their identity. Not a totally alien process to that, is it?
No, not a totally alien process.
Not that you were branded as a loser before, but you couldn't make it work with the identity you did have there. It was like, why is this so hard? This shouldn't be this hard.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It's a double-sided thing in that the music does allow me opportunities that I wouldn't have otherwise. I went on an audition about a year ago for a small part in a sitcom that 5 different people came up to me and told me they had recommended me for. It was a singing part. None of those people recommended me for any other parts, and I can do other parts. But as soon as there's music, people think, oh, Eliza Skinner. So it's an opportunity, but it's also limiting, because how often does that come up? So that was why it was so important for me to try to expand it and get people to think of other things, not just music, when they hear my name.
The thing that ties together, or one thing that ties together your Los Angeles and New York careers, your one-woman show, Eliza Skinner is Shameless. You've done it in both cities, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done it in both cities, and I've toured it around. I've done it in Charleston and Austin and Chicago. Yeah, I've done it all over the place.
it crystallizes what I think of as a theme of a lot of your work, and this is a show you, the listener, can see pieces related to the material of as comedy videos on YouTube. It crystallizes a theme which is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to have an interest in women who sort of compulsively complicate their own lives in ways they don't fully understand. Does that make any sense?
Yes, that's dead on. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, I like that.
That makes sense, but why? Why do you like that?
Oh gosh, why do I? I find it fascinating. I mean, with that, because it feels so clear to people from the outside what they're doing, and it's so unclear from the inside what they're doing. For that show specifically, my process in writing it was to come up with 3 very, very unlikable characters, and then try to find a way to make the audience like them by the end of the show. Not excuse them; they're still terrible people, but they're somehow more human. And I think that getting in their own way is the thing that makes them human. That you want to just pull them aside and say, just don't do that. There's one character, Amy, who got pretty popular in the with one video on the internet called Amy at the Club. That is a great example of what you were saying. That she came out of a discussion with a friend of mine who would tour doing improv shows with the UCB theater. And I was talking to him one day after he came back from a tour, and was like, "So, you went to a college, a lot of college girls hitting on you, huh?" And he was like, "No, not me, only the hot guy in the group. They never talk to me." And I was like, "I don't believe that. You're hilarious." So I'm sure, and girls like hilarious guys, so I'm sure they're hitting on you afterwards. And he was like, "No, they're mean to me. They come up to me after shows and say things like, 'You're so stupid. Why are you here? Why are you even still here, stupid?'" And I was like, "Oh, that is them hitting on you. They're hitting on you, and they don't realize." And I thought about it, and I was like, those girls who do that must be so confused when they go home at the end of the night and are lonely. And they're like, "But I talked to all these people, and I totally was making it clear that I liked them, and I'm all by myself." It's pushing for love. It's trying to make people love you. Like, I will make you love me. And as soon as you stop pushing, I think, and let people love you, that's when it can happen.
With these 3 women, especially with this Amy at the Club, you can see a first-person video of what it would be like to interact with this girl, or be interacted at by her on YouTube. We've all had the experience of, at least I think almost every man has had the experience of having one of these Amys come up to you, and except she gets a lot closer in life than in the video, and the breath is so alcohol-y, and it's just like, "Why aren't you dancing? You're so retarded. You like guys, don't you?" Did you have a lot of a wide field of study to get this character internalized, or did you have to go specific and find specific examples, or could you just look around?
I think I could look around, and also by the time I wrote that, I had lived long enough and been through college and seen enough of it that I just knew her.
Is that all it takes, to have lived through that experience, been a little observant?
Yeah, I mean, for me, for this character, and also these characters are all some aspect of me that I fear, like if they're before the grace of God, if I let myself be the worst version of this one little seed of something that I've got in me, it would be that.
What's the seed of Amy?
The seed of Amy is being more aggressive than like pushing rather than listening. Like you were saying, like she talks at people, and yeah, she's just super aggressive, and not in a football sort of way, but in a I'm going to show you how funny and mean I am, sort of. And that's the other seed, being funny and mean. I had to learn I could still be funny and mean, but I tried to really turn down the mean. And I have friends who every now and then I'll slide back towards that, and my friend Adam will be like, "Oh, you're doing it. You're doing that thing." there she comes. And I'm like, okay, all right, sorry. I'll go get everyone cookies. Try to be nice again.
So when you hear men say that women aren't funny, I imagine you say, well, no, that's not true. But then I imagine you think of the Amy's of the world who think that funny equals mean, and it's just like, you're ruining it for the rest of us. Stop. They're bad for the team.
It's true. Yeah. But the problem is there are so many douchebag guys out there who are just like quoting Family Guy or like slapping each other around and just doing horrible things that they think are funny, but nobody looks at those guys and goes, see, guys aren't funny. They go, douchebags aren't funny. So yeah, women are funny. Horrible women aren't funny.
We need a more catchy word than horrible women. I mean, it needs to be the equivalent of douchebags, doesn't it, in terminology?
Yeah. Ball wash, would that be the other? No.
It's not being used, I guess. I mean, that has that advantage.
Skanks aren't funny.
And by the way, listeners, for a discussion on the Family Guyization of comedy, tune into the Jordan Morris episode, which should be in the archives at this point. Now, another character in this one-woman show, I believe Karen is her name, the mom, in the dorm room. And one of the aspects of this character, the salient one perhaps, is a kind of quasi-racism, but something more interesting and more complicated is also going on. It's what I've noticed more and more lately and been more fascinated by, is a certain class of middle-aged women who show a kind of complicated strain and this pressure to like defeat their daughters in some sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's I want to be your friend, not your mother. The resistance to being old or in charge. That aspect of it came from just one moment of watching I Want to Date Your Daughter, I think was the name of the show. It was an old MTV show where a woman actually said, it was a show where a boy would go out on dates with three mothers and have to choose, based on the dates with the mothers, which daughter he wanted to go out with, having never met any of the daughters.
Was this a long-lived show, or did it not have legs ultimately?
I lived longer than that description makes it sound like it would, right? I think it was probably at least 3 years. And one of the mothers on the date with the sub, so the mothers are just train wrecks because they're not on board, which is respectable, or they're whoring their daughters out, or they're getting to that point where I think he likes me more than he likes you, which I don't think is where this character landed. But there was one who said, you should go out with Kelsey because we did get her breast implants. I got some too, so we still match.
Oh, that's real?
Yeah, that was a real thing. But I was like, that is the funniest thing. I'm stealing that, and I totally stole it. And yeah, it's horrible. But it's exactly what you were saying, that it's this, I'm still viable, I'm still alive, I'm still part of her world. It's probably the same thing as like dads playing basketball too long and not being okay with their kid beating them.
I feel like we've known about those dads for a while, though. Are these Karen-type moms a more recent thing? I feel like they might be, or maybe they were just in different forms before. Well,
and I think it's also that whole breakdown of family roles, where women don't want to be some stuffy old mom. I'm not going to be a mom. I'm going to be a pal. We still go to the mall together. We fit into the same size jeans. We're like the same people. You like me. Because also, having growing up, how you ended up feeling about your mother. How you ended up feeling like, oh, she's out of date and she's stodgy and she doesn't understand me. And I think mothers put that math together and realize, oh, I don't want my kid to think that way about me at all. Also, it's all fear of death too. Like, I don't want to die. What will keep me young? Wearing my daughter's jeans.
It's as good as anything, I suppose. There's no fountain of youth. But it seems like then you must... Do you feel some now inbuilt defense against becoming a Karen because you have already internalized Karen and performed her?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'm definitely a Wendy. I think there's a lot of us. We've had a discussion of Peter Pan guys for years, but there's a lot of us who are,
Maybe describe your concept of a Peter Pan guy.
A guy who can't grow up, who's living out an extended adolescence in his adulthood. Very often doesn't want to commit to a relationship. Even if they're committed to a relationship, doesn't want to get married, doesn't want to have kids, wants to keep stay at the party. And I'm definitely a struggle with being a female version of that. And like, what aspects of that do I need to change, and what aspects of it do I need to just be okay with? And because I don't want to become that ugly version of it, where it becomes desperate and gross and unattractive. Not even on a like sexually attractive, just like unattractive as a human, where people are like, oh, I don't want to be around that.
Bad mojo.
Yeah, exactly.
Playing the women of Shameless, do you play them differently in Los Angeles and New York, or are they so universal that, the alleged coastal types, these types exist on both coasts, in both major cities, or is there tailoring going on?
There's not too much tailoring going on. It's pretty much the same everywhere, but what is interesting is what people react to. The audiences definitely react differently, city to city, and also what I find very interesting is when I talk to people one-on-one after the show, especially when I talk to women after the show, but just people generally also, who they identify with, which characters they're like, well, these ones were terrible, but this one wasn't so bad. Why was she in there? And I'm like, oh, you just told me which one you are.
Was it obvious before, or was that the only way you knew? Was they said, oh, they weren't so bad, and got it.
Well, I mean, I guess maybe it would be, but since I had created such specific archetypes, I had spent so much time in these roles and kind of like rolling around in them and figuring them out. I understand them more. And so when somebody comes up to me and essentially tells me that's who I am, I'm like, oh, I know you pretty well. And all these characters, yes, they're horrible, but I also really love them. To try too hard for love isn't the most despicable thing in the world. It's, if there's some way to try to fight death, pushing too hard for love, that's probably a good one to do it.
I feel like I want to know more about the reactions women have to the show. Like you say, they come up to you. What do they want to know about it, or what is it? How do they react to it? Because guys can always say, oh yeah, I've encountered all three of them. Sure. When you're satirizing certain types of women, how do women respond to that? Not that it's one solid group, but what is fascinating about that?
Well, I think most of the ways that women have been portrayed in movies and TV have been either not despicable, either they are likable characters. Will Ferrell has made a career out of being lovable, unlikable characters. All of his big roles are horrible, but we love them. And they haven't had as much of that for women, if any at all. I mean, maybe some of the now Melissa McCarthy Bridesmaids kind of stuff, but very little of that. And so, I feel like my show kind of presents an acceptance of those horrible type of characters and those horrible, again, parts of you. And so I think it rings an interesting bell with people, with some people. And that's when they come up to me and, as I said, are like, yes, that lady is the worst, or that lady is not so bad, or that's my mom, you did my mom. I think that it just is something that feels innately familiar in a way that has not been talked about. They're character types that are kind of in between. I think for some people, and maybe especially guys, it's like, oh, this one's a trashy club girl, this one's a racist mom, and this one's a cougar, because the other one that I don't have on video is a cougar. But to women who I think also have that seed of, Lord, don't let me become this. Please, I could see how this could happen. Please don't let me be that. Seeing it in front of them and seeing it treated like these are terrible, but they're still human. They still have some reason why they do deserve love. Creates an interesting tension.
What sort of perceptual powers did you have to develop to see through to the lovable core of the types of people you would look at as models or as repositories of information to shape these three characters?
It's just why.
Just why?
Yeah, why would someone... Because people... Nobody thinks they're an asshole. No one does something because that's the asshole thing to do. They do it because they're the hero of their own story.
I had my reasons. Everybody else is the asshole.
Yeah, and I'm right, and I'm just trying to do the best I can. Everybody's trying to do the best they can. So when somebody does something horrible and shitty and obnoxious, they have some sort of rationale, some sort of logic that made it the right thing for them to do. And so with these, it was why? Why does this girl? Like I was saying, why does she talk so harshly to people? Why is she so mean and pushy? She's trying to be cute. She's trying to connect with them and still be, while she's still scared of them. She's very scared of making a real connection that she's not in control of also. And that all of those things are things you can relate to and things that you empathize with.
Often in the comedy world, I'll hear people say, geez, why is the comedy world so filled with assholes? I take it that with a slightly different point of view, like the one you've described, the comedy world is a little bit easier to navigate.
I think on the surface level, it does make it easier. And as comedians, I think that's where we find material, especially once you get to a certain point where you're no longer talking about funny movie titles and making fun of magazines or whatever. When you're really talking about yourself and your own perspective, it's coming out of asking yourself, why? Why do I do those things? Why does that person I care about who drives me nuts, why do they do those things? That's where your material is. And yeah, looking around and feeling like these people are such assholes and have no social skills. I mean, I would almost say, I don't know, the stand-up world and the improv world both have their own sets of crazy, absent social skills.
Are you a rarity in that you have gone between the worlds, or what's the divide, I guess?
I am a little bit, not that rare, but yeah, most people stay in one world or the other, and it's a little difficult. There are advantages to going from improv to stand-up, in that you have a lot of stage experience. You feel a little bit more comfortable on stage than somebody who just walked onto an open mic, but you're also so used to coming up with things off the cuff. A lot of times improvisers will become very rehearsed with their stand-up because they feel like it's such a different thing. So you've got your improv brain and your stand-up brain, and it's hard to start melding those two and being okay with improvising a little bit in your stand-up. But yeah, asking yourself why people are such assholes and explaining their behavior also excuses too much, I think. I mean, I think it's an interesting artistic exercise and again, something I love to explore. But sometimes people are people that you should stay away from, even if they have some weird, fascinating, justified backstory to their crappiness. It's still crappiness.
How do you know when you should stay away from them?
I do not know. I wish I knew.
Trial and error, the old T&E?
Yeah, it's true. It's a lot of trial and error. Because, yeah, sometimes I will get fascinated by people who are, because they are the most complex. Because each card that you pull and the deck just leads to another one and another one, another one. And those are probably the most fucked up people that you should stay the farthest away from. But I'm like, but look how long this game goes on. There's so many cards.
It's so complicated and grotesque. Look at it. I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's my own psychosis and also what attracts me to this world and this type of performance.
People who visit your site, elizaskinner.net, will realize that there's a written, textual side to what you do as well as a performative side. They'll see you have blog posts. They'll see you on your About page anywhere writing comedic essays currently. Where does that come from? When did you add that branch onto the tree, I guess?
I think I started doing that about like 5 or 6 years ago. And it was just sort of something, well, actually it started in that I went home to work for my father. My father's a filmmaker, and he was working on a film about the founding of Jamestown and about Pocahontas, who I am descended from. And he brought me down to work as an assistant director on his film. And I didn't have work in New York. It was one of those weird times where you're between different things and needed the money. And I had also broken up with my boyfriend at the time and was pretty bummed out about that. One of those times where you break up with somebody and you don't realize how bummed out you are. You think, oh, I'm kind of bummed out. And then a year later, you're like, oh, I was severely depressed then.
Wait a second.
Yeah, you don't...
Lucky to be alive.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't see it when you're in it. So I agreed to go home and work for him. but thought the only way that I can make this worthwhile to myself is if I make some sort of artistic project out of it. So I decided to keep one of these newfangled weblogs.
You say a web blog? Oh, well, what is that?
Yeah. I ended up shortening it down to blog, and it caught on. So I had a blog, and when I came back to New York, all of these people in the comedy community and a couple of people in the comedy community who normally had very little, if anything, to say to me, came up to me and said they really liked what I was doing. They really liked what I was writing. And so I thought, well, maybe I have something here, and maybe this isn't just funny to me, it's funny. So I kept doing it. And then after that project was over, I started one about music, and then I started my own website, and yeah, I just have gotten good feedback from it. So I do really enjoy writing. It's still another way to create characters, and with my writing, with my essays, it's still like mining myself, mining my own weirdness and fears. Again, going for fears and anxiety, I find very interesting and fruitful as an artist.
Tell me the most fruitful fears.
Of being misunderstood and connecting with people and having people know how you feel. I think that's the biggest fear, and it's the same fear that keeps people from being performers at all. Having people know what you really are scared of, or what you really feel about them, how much you care about them or don't care about them. Also, foxholes, terrifying. Foxholes are really scary.
Foxholes?
Oh, yeah. I'm really scared of foxholes. And you know in those old cartoons where you would have a big fish chasing a little fish, and the little fish goes through like a loop and an anchor underwater, and then the big fish goes through and gets caught in it?
Oh, with the tail flipping?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my stress dream, like every night. Yeah, really scared of underwater tubes.
You're scared of you being the one stuck, or you being pursued and not being clever enough to be able to go through an anchor?
Oh, no, being stuck. Yeah, being the big...
Water slides were probably not the first attraction you went to as a kid.
Oh, I hate those. Yeah, no way. Yeah.
No, thank you. Also, if someone reads your blog, or if they've watched a certain particular one of your videos, they'll know you have a fascination with someone unlikely, Tyler Perry, also known as in drag as Medea. He's got posters everywhere now. A movie called Good Deeds, also starring him and with his name up there. Why Tyler Perry? What's interesting about him?
Oh man, why not Tyler Perry?
I know, right? Yet it's hard to explain.
Yeah, I'll say first off, when I moved to LA and started going on generals, which are these meetings where you meet with people in the industry, whether they are production companies or casting directors, or they just generally want to meet you and start getting to know you.
I don't think I know what these are. So how does a general come together? Why? How and why?
Someone will schedule it for you. If you have a manager or an agent, they'll usually be the one doing it. But otherwise, if just someone recommends you to someone, and they don't have a specific project they want you to interview for, but they'll say, well, we want to have a general meeting with you. And so you sit there and you show them what you look like and how fun and charming you are and how not terrible it would be to spend days working with you. And so then they keep you in mind for other things, hopefully. And they just generally have you on their radar. But it's a big get to know you without any specific point to it. And one of the aspects are, especially when you're looking for a manager or an agent, they say what type of whose career do you want to have? And as a lady comedian, I'm supposed to say Tina Fey or Amy Poehler.
Those are the two that are okay to say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and maybe variations around them. Sarah Silverman, like all the big...
You couldn't say like a Phyllis Diller?
You know, you could, but I think people would have a harder time figuring out what to do with you. And those are all like great ladies with awesome careers, but when I first started going on meetings, I would be totally honest and say, the career I want is Tyler Perry's. And people laughed at me and were like,
But seriously, what? Who do you... Phyllis Diller?
What? And then I found my manager who, when I was like, Tyler Perry, he was like, makes sense. Because, oh my God, who has a better career than Tyler Perry? He produces and writes his own movies, directs them, has TV shows. I'm not crazy about his TV shows, honestly. But he's got a bunch of them on TBS.
I would guess like many... I mean, we're both outside of the demographic he claims to aim for. I would guess like all of us, you're not too keen directly on any given one of his products. But
No, that's not entirely true. So he's done all these things, and on top of them still gets to be in the Star Wars movie. Like, he's done a lot of stuff. But he's sought out his own audience. He never went to Hollywood, to an audience that was already established and said, please like me. He just did his thing and did his thing and did his thing, and the people that liked what he was doing came and found him, and then more came and found him, and then more. So he built this audience of people that were just honestly into what he did. He didn't have to ever pander. He didn't have to ever try to figure out what he thought people might want to see.
Let me lean on your Tyler Perry scholarship for a second. How did he know they were there, do you think? How did he get the sense that that audience existed to be swooped up by him?
Well, he started with plays, so he could see them. They were in the audience. And he started by producing plays in I think it was either a small theater or a church or around Atlanta. And then he started touring them on the chitlin circuit, which is the circuit of gospel plays that go mostly the South and East Coast, and those, they were getting okay crowds and better crowds and bigger crowds, and then it became meaningful for those plays when Tyler Perry was at the beginning of it. He's amazing about branding himself. He puts his name in front of things, and if he hadn't put his name in front of all of those plays, people might not necessarily know I'm a Tyler Perry fan. They might know I'm a Medea fan, but they still wouldn't know what are these other things that he does that I like. So yeah, when he transferred to making movies, he knew he would have an audience, and that name already meant something. So to like the larger audience, i.e. white people, when these movies started coming out and had Tyler Perry at the beginning of it, we were like, well, who is this guy? Why do we care? Well, clearly thousands of people do care because they're going to see these movies, and joke's on you. I just love that, the idea of building your own audience. And I do actually like his movies. Some of them I can't stand. Some of them are really... my first experience with one was I went to see Why Did I Get Married? We were on tour with I Eat Pandas, and very often when we were on tour, when you're touring, you have nothing to do during the day, so you'll just go see a movie. And there weren't any movies that we wanted to see, so we kind of movie rouletted it and saw whatever was at that time that we showed up at the movie theater, which was some terrible baseball movie that we couldn't even get past the opening credits to. And so my partner and I looked at each other and we were like, should we get out of here and go to the other, go to Why Did I Get Married? I'm like, sure. We walked in and it was a packed movie theater, and it was one of the most entertaining movies and movie-going experiences I've ever had. It was one of those ones where I'm like sliding out of my seat and like jumping up like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened.
Was this all fans in the audience? Like this was a room of Tyler Perry fans, or?
Well, I mean, they weren't so off the chain that clearly we love this, but it was a lot of people in there, and I doubt they'd all been dragged. But it was a legitimately good movie. I mean, it was not Citizen Kane. It didn't change the way I think about the human experience, but I laughed. And yeah, he definitely has the Christian thing going. But if you see a Tyler Perry movie and you change every time he says Jesus, God, any of that stuff to the universe, quote unquote.
So he name checks all Jesus, God's Holy Ghost left and right.
All the, yeah. Well, anything like the church, whatever. If you change it all to the universe, it's good messages. Like, you should forgive people. You should get out of your own way.
The core morality is fine.
Yeah.
Maybe not different than someone might draw from a Shameless character.
Yeah. I would hope so.
What separates a good Tyler Perry movie from a bad one? Like one that's a genuine movie from one that he clearly knocked off, to your mind?
There's a certain joy in the melodrama of it for me. He goes really over the top with how good and how bad characters are, and I like that. But sometimes the joy is missing, and it's still over the top with how good or bad the characters are. And it doesn't have that sense of play to it. That's
like obligatory melodrama, maybe?
Yeah. And that's when it feels a little stale, and it just starts feeling hack. But as long as it's inspired and joyous, and you're surprised by each twist that he's adding of how bad or how good people become, then that's fun. But if you can see it all coming in a very plodding way, then yeah, not so great.
So where is Eliza Skinner's chitlin circuit? I mean, who do you see as your real hardcore that you'll build on as the years go by? Who are they?
They're all over the place. There's some from Twitter, some from my website, some from Diamond Lion, some from The Beatdown, which is this freestyle rap battle that I produce and host. And usually there are people out there, especially because of the internet now, who are really great about finding what it is that they like and then finding more about it. And so somebody will say, oh, I liked her in this show. I'm going to go see this. I'm going to go see that. And sometimes they tell me about it. Sometimes they don't. But I just know that my numbers are getting bigger, and people. It was moving from New York here was scary because I felt like I definitely had that in New York. Like I could put up a show and people were going to come to it. And then I came here, and that wasn't necessarily true. There was a little bit of crossover. There were some people who had already seen my show here or who had seen me do stuff in New York but lived here or had moved here. But it was a little scary, and I just sort of had to trust that it happened in one city, it can happen here too. And it has. And it's been really, really great seeing that can happen here too.
Now, you remind me, I was going to ask you about the freestyle rap battles at the very beginning of this interview. We're now at the very end, but still, tell the audience, I mean, A, how they can experience these, and B, what does it take, I mean, even just logistically, to get together a freestyle rap battle?
Well, you gotta have a beatboxer. Sure. Mm-hmm. And that's where I started when I came up with it. I knew I wanted to do this because I had been in a lot of different shows. I had started in New York. One of my first jobs was touring, doing short form comedy, short form improv, and that lends itself to having little rap things on it from place to place. And so I knew people could kind of do it, and I knew I enjoyed it. And so I decided I wanted to do this, and I had a friend who was a beatboxer who we had always wanted to do some sort of project together but didn't know what. And so I called him up and was like, do you want to work with me on this? And he was like, absolutely. And so we sat down and figured out how we would structure the show. That was Chris Sullivan, Shockwave, who's a great beatboxer. He went on to being on the New Electric Company. Yeah. So we started running the show, and we would it's very fun. The show is always great. It's 5 comedians and 1 audience member in one-on-one freestyle rap battles, all improvised, and it just brings something out of these performers. You don't have to be a good rapper to do it. In fact, a lot of people who are good rappers or have a lot of experience with rap have a different sort of pressure on themselves that keeps them from being themselves in the show, and it gets harder for them. It's really tough for those type of performers.
Is it like a genuinely good singer, technically speaking, doing karaoke? It's kind of like, well, why are you up there? You're not being funny.
Yeah, it is. And like a genuinely good singer who doesn't know how to use a mic, or there's also like they're not quite as in the moment. They can't be in the moment in the same way. But it does. You're so in the moment. You have to be there and commute and working with the beatboxer. And also comedy is so much about rhythm. It makes sense to me that rapping lends itself to tapping a lot of the same skills. It's somehow always amazing. Even if the people on stage are terrible rappers, they're such good performers every time that it's a great show. It's magic. And it's really fun booking it. It's stressful and difficult booking it, but it's fun because I kind of have to sell the show, and I have to figure out people who I'm like, I think you would be good at this. I think there's something about you. Either it's obvious, like you're musical, or you love hip hop, or it's just some sort of bravado that they've got, or aggressiveness on stage, or fearlessness that I have to convince them to do it. And you see aspects of performers that you wouldn't know about otherwise. One of my favorite battles was when Thomas Middleditch won, never having rapped, like no rhymes in the show at all. And I thought he would be really great at it because he does musical improv and he does Shakespeare improv, which is all rhyming. But he somehow didn't find a way to lock into the rap, lock those two together and make it rapping. But he was just so charming. One of my favorite lines from that show was him just saying, "Hey, you, I like your pants. We like each other's pants. That's something." terrible. This is a terrible rap. But the audience found him so charming. They loved him. And the other rappers in that show were crazy good. There was UTK, Utkarsh Ambudkar, who's a great actor and a great rapper, and TJ Miller, who has put out his own album now of rap.
It's kind of its own genre, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we've actually had a few things like that. Like Donald Glover, Childish Gambino, used to do the show way before he had an album out. I mean, he had like mixtapes, but even those were mostly him DJing, not really rapping. People who have grown out of the show and started doing that in their acts. But it's not necessarily about the rapping. It's about the performance. It's fun.
The audience wants to attend this. Where, when, and how, I suppose.
It's right now. It's the first Monday of the month at the Nerdist Theater at Meltdown Comics, Nerd Melt. So the next one I think is March 5th.
And finally, what circumstances led RuPaul to call you shelarious?
That was the best. That was I was performing in Austin and was really in a drag race hole. I'm a huge fan of RuPaul's Drag Race. I have fan art on my wall. I bought off the internet a print that somebody had done of one of last year's contestants, and I have it framed on my wall. I love it so much. So I was performing in Austin, and I ran off stage to check Twitter to see what RuPaul was saying on Twitter. I was so locked in with it. And so then I Twittered about that and wrote something like, ran off stage to see what RuPaul's doing on Twitter. And since he clearly was on Twitter, saw it, and then retweeted my Tyler Perry video to everyone and just called it shelarious. So that is the context in which RuPaul called me shelarious, specifically the Tyler Perry video. A lot of wigs in it. There's a lot, so I guess he's got to love the wigs.
It'll always be my dream to earn the same accolade. I've been speaking with Eliza Skinner at the Bourgeois Pig in Hollywood. You'll find her at elizaskinner.net. You'll find her on Fridays at the UCB Theater. You'll find her at Saturdays on the Little Modern Theater. You'll find her doing the rap battles first Monday of every month. Excellent. Well, Eliza, thank you so much for taking the time.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. Keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to the people backing in this season, including Aidan Nullman, Andy Cooney, Ben Bartley, Brian J. Dell, Doubt Us Artwork, Greg Bigelow, Greg Linster, Henry Coronin, Umberto Grant, James Faber, Jonathan McCalmont, Mark Larson, Matt Warren, Mia Muratori, Nicholas Croft, Paul Doyle, Ray McGuire, Rob Montz, Robert Foley, Roberto Medri, Samuel Hansen, Sean Dudley, Small Demons, Stephen Ingles, Steve Himmer, TSD, and Wayne Wright.